The smell of grease and sweat from Maya Silva cut through the sterile air of premium motors like an offense. The LED lights shone on the Italian marble floor, reflecting the perfect contours of cars that were worth more than the house where she lived and worked. She had spent the last 12 hours on her stomach under a stubborn engine, and every muscle in her body ached, but a tired smile of victory hovered on her lips. That smile died the instant the receptionist, with her impeccable suit and a poorly disguised look of disgust, measured her from head to toe. "Can I help you? The delivery and service area is in the back," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, dismissing Maya as if she were a piece of trash brought in by the wind. Maya felt the familiar sting of humiliation, an electric current of injustice that ran down her spine. She took a deep breath, the smell of oil on her hands serving as a reminder of her competence, of her true identity, and kept her voice steady. "I didn't come to make a delivery. I came to pick up a part I ordered. My name is Maya Silva." The exchange of words attracted the attention of Augusto Mendez, the dealership's owner, who was walking through the showroom like a king inspecting his domain. Tall, dressed in a very expensive suit that had probably never seen a drop of sweat, he approached with an air of amused superiority. Upon hearing Maya's response, he let out a short, mocking laugh, a sound that echoed through the oppressive silence of the place. "Maya Silva, the mechanical engineer!" He spat the words, her professional title sounding like a joke in his mouth. "Looking at your state, I would imagine you fix carts, not that you work with precision parts. What do you really want here?" The humiliation was now a public spectacle. Maya felt her face burn, not with shame, but with a cold, contained anger. The same anger that had fueled her through 15 years of closed doors and sabotage. He didn't see an engineer. Graduated with honors from MIT, he only saw a woman covered in grease, where she, according to him, did not belong. Ignoring Augusto's venomous laugh, Maya took her cell phone out of her jumpsuit pocket, the clean screen contrasting with her grease-stained fingers. With 2 taps, she opened the proof of payment for the part, a small electronic component she needed to finish repairing an old car whose owner had already lost hope. She turned the screen to Augusto, the sharp image of the receipt, speaking for itself. "The part is paid for. The order code is 783B. I just want what's mine, Mr. Mendez. I don't want to take up your time, and I certainly don't want you to waste yours on my appearance," she said, her voice a calm and polished steel blade, cutting through his arrogance. Her composure infuriated him even more. He didn't expect dignity. He expected her to shrink, to stammer. For a man like Augusto, a woman's calm under his attack was a direct affront to his authority. He looked at her cell phone with disdain, then swept the showroom with his gaze, as if seeking inspiration for a new form of psychological torture. It was then that his eyes landed on the darkest corner of the showroom, where a red silk cover hid the unmistakable silhouette of a ghost that haunted his dealership. A cruel smile spread across his face. "You want to prove you're a real engineer? You want my respect? Then let's play a little game." Augusto walked slowly to the red shape and, with a dramatic gesture, pulled off the cover. Underneath, a red Ferrari 488 GTB gleamed, a work of art of Italian engineering. But Maya could feel, even from a distance, that something was wrong. The car didn't have the aura of power it should. It looked like a sick, tamed beast. "This machine," Augusto began, his voice now filled with a false, theatrical tone, "is my personal problem. A jewel that has been sitting here for 3 weeks. 5 of the best mechanics money can buy, including my workshop. Foreman, a man with 30 years of experience, have already tried everything. No one can make it start. No one even understands what the problem is." He circled the car like a predator. "I say it's impossible, but you, with all this confidence, an MIT graduate, maybe you know something no one else does." He stopped in front of her, his body leaning forward, invading her personal space. "The bet is simple. If you can fix this car, I will give you 100,000 reais on the spot. And a public apology, here in front of everyone. But if you fail, he paused, savoring the moment, you will go back to your workshop and hang a sign on the door saying, I am a fraud. Come on, engineer, show me what you've got. The silence in the Premium Motors showroom was so dense that Maya could hear it humming in her ears, a sound that mixed with the racing beat of her own heart. 100,000 reais. The amount danced in her mind, not as an abstract number, but as the concrete image of a different life. It meant a new lift for her workshop, a state-of-the-art diagnostic scanner she only saw in catalogues, and above all, the freedom to say no to small, thankless jobs just to pay the monthly bills. It was a chance to breathe, but the price of failure was her soul. The fraud sign that Augusto described with such pleasure would not just be wood and paint, it would be the materialization of every doubt ever cast upon her, the final confirmation to the world that she was an imposter. For an instant, fear paralyzed her. Logic screamed that it was a trap, a risk too great. She looked at Augusto's face, at the smug smile and the certainty of victory in his eyes. And in that moment, his image merged with that of all the men who had ever belittled her, who had stolen her merits, who had called her emotional in meetings, and who, in the end, had discarded her. The anger, an ember that had been slowly burning in her chest for 15 years, became a flame. It was no longer about the money. It was about them. It was about every woman who was told she didn't belong. She lifted her chin, looked directly into Augusto's eyes, and the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. I accept. Her voice sounded clear and firm, without a hint of hesitation. The moment the words left her mouth, a visible transformation occurred in Maya. The defensive posture, the tension in her shoulders, all of it dissolved, giving way to a calm and focus that silenced the murmurs that were beginning to rise in the showroom. She was no longer the dirty woman being humiliated. She was the engineer facing a problem. She walked towards the Ferrari, her steps firm and deliberate, completely ignoring Augusto and the audience he had created. To her, they no longer existed. Her universe was now reduced to that piece of red and silent metal. She didn't open the door or the hood. Instead, she began to circle the vehicle slowly, her eyes scanning. Every line, every crevice, every tire. The narrator inside her head, the voice of her MIT training, began to ask questions. No noises, no ignition attempts, total failure. Electrical or fuel, or both. She crouched, her filthy jumpsuit brushing against the immaculate floor, and looked under the car, searching for leaks, for visible damage to the chassis, for anything out of place. She ran her fingertips gently over the cold bodywork, not with admiration, but like a doctor palpating a patient, feeling the integrity of the structure. After a full circle, she stood up and held out her hand towards Augusto, without even looking at him. The key and the service history. I want to see everything the other 5 did. The order was given with such natural authority that Augusto, for a moment, was speechless before, almost instinctively reaching into his pocket to obey. One of the employees, a young man in an impeccably white jumpsuit, brought a stool, but Maya ignored it. She sat on the marble floor, crossing her legs, and rested the tablet with the service history on her lap. The gesture shocked the small audience of wealthy clients even more, as they exchanged looks of astonishment and disapproval. But Maya didn't see them. The outside world had become a soundless blur. Her deep, intense brown eyes devoured the lines of text and the report's graphics. Each note was a step in the labyrinth where the other 5 mechanics had gotten lost. Crankshaft position sensor replaced. She read mentally. No result. Fuel line pressure test within parameters. High pressure fuel pump replaced. No result. Complete ECU reprogramming with factory software. Intermittent communication failure. Battery replaced with a new lithium unit. No result. Maya saw the pattern clearly. It was a script of desperation. They weren't diagnosing, they were guessing, swapping the most expensive parts in the hope of a miracle. Their arrogance was written between the lines. They assumed a complex and exotic problem, worthy of a Ferrari, and ignored the fundamentals. Her thinking was like a scalpel, dissecting the other's mistakes. Intermittent communication failure with the ECU? Why intermittent? What would cause a failure that isn't constant? It's not the component, it's the connection. It's the path, not the destination. She felt the first spark of certainty. They were looking for a monster, and she suspected the problem was a simple, and for that very reason invisible, traitor. After almost 20 minutes in absolute silence, absorbing every detail of what had been done, Maya stood up. The movement was so sudden that Augusto, who was keeping a safe distance, was startled. She slid into the driver's seat, the soft red leather contrasting with her rough jumpsuit. The smell of new leather and failure hung in the air. She inserted the key, but her fingers hovered over the start button. Instead of trying to start the engine, she just activated the car's electrical system. The touch instrument panel came to life in a cacophony of yellow and red warning lights, a festival of errors that confirmed the electronic chaos described in the reports. But Maya's eyes were not on the engine or ABS warning lights. They were fixed on a small, almost insignificant icon that blinked irregularly in the lower corner of the screen, the battery voltage indicator. It blinked with a subtle, almost imperceptible arrhythmia, a sick heart. The battery is new, she thought, so it shouldn't fluctuate, unless something was stealing its power unstably, or the power wasn't even getting where it should. With a new wave of determination, she got out of the car and walked to the rear. With a precise movement, she unlocked and lifted the glass cover that protected the masterpiece of Italian engineering. The V8 engine was there, clean and imposing, but to Maya it looked vulnerable, exposed. She leaned in, not to admire, but to sniff, and then she smelled it. It wasn't the smell of gasoline or oil. It was a faint chemical smell of burnt plastic, a smell that did not belong in that place. Her eyes followed the smell and she found it, a small wiring harness near the control module, wrapped in a cheap and coarse electrical tape which was already starting to melt. The discovery of that small detail, the smell of burnt plastic, was like finding the first piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle in the middle of a dark room. It was the thread. Maya straightened up and once again addressed Augusto, who was watching her with a mixture of impatience and a curiosity he tried to hide at all costs. "I need a multimeter and a pair of precision-cutting pliers," she declared, not asked. The tone was of someone in command of an operating room. One of the younger mechanics, who had been watching from a distance with wide eyes, ran to the workshop and returned in seconds with the tools. Maya took the multimeter, her hands moving with a hypnotizing familiarity and efficiency. She clamped one probe to a solid grounding point on the chassis and with the other probe carefully pierced the coarse electrical tape of the suspicious harness. The number that appeared on the multimeter's digital screen was absurd, fluctuating erratically, showing a very high and unstable resistance. Then she moved the probe to a neighboring harness, one that looked original, and the device immediately registered a reading close to 0. Perfect. The proof was irrefutable. She turned to Augusto, the multimeter still in her hand, its screen shining like a beacon of truth. "Your Ferrari's problem was never the engine or the ECU, Mr. Mendez. The problem is this," she pointed with the pliers. "This part. It's not original. The resistance is so high that the energy can't pass through cleanly. The ECU receives corrupted electrical data, panics, and shuts everything down to protect the engine. It is a safety mechanism working perfectly in response to a fraudulent part." Augusto turned pale. Maya's accusation was an atomic bomb in his world of perfection and genuine parts. "That's impossible," he stammered, his arrogance being replaced by a defensive fury. "We only use original Ferrari parts, imported directly from Italy. My technicians are certified." He signaled to his workshop foreman, a robust older man named Raimundo, who approached reluctantly. "Raimundo, tell her. You supervised the work on this car yourself." Raimundo swallowed hard, his eyes avoiding Maya's and focusing on the exposed part. He saw the multimeter, the cheap electrical tape, and a drop of sweat ran down his temple. Before he could formulate an excuse, Maya acted. With the tip of the pliers, she pulled at the edge of the electrical tape, which came apart with shameful ease, revealing the wire underneath. It was not the high-quality copper wire with Captain insulation that Ferrari used. It was a cheap aluminum wire with a thin plastic sheath that was already discolored by the heat. It was a part so obviously counterfeit, it would have been comical if it weren't inside a 500,000 real engine. Raimundo's expression crumbled. The once impassive face was now a mask of pure panic. He began to babble something about an emergency supplier from Campinas, that the original part was out of stock and they needed a quick solution. In that instant, Maya understood everything. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate shortcut. And the panic in Raimundo's eyes was not of someone caught making a mistake, but of someone caught being part of something much, much bigger. Her investigation had just shifted from a mechanical problem to a conspiracy. Maya ignored Augusto, who now looked like a wax statue melting under the showroom lights. Her total focus was on Raimundo, the workshop foreman whose face was as white as paper. The engineer took a step towards him, not threateningly, but with the intensity of an investigator who knows she is facing the truth. "A supplier from Campinas?" she repeated, her voice low, but carrying a weight that made the man take a step back. "An emergency supplier for a specific wiring harness for a Ferrari 488 GTB. Raimundo, we both know that doesn't exist. Ferrari doesn't have emergency suppliers in Campinas. They have a global logistics system, with every part tracked by unique codes. You don't buy a component like this as if you were buying a screw at the corner store." Her logic was a scalpel, dissecting the fragile lie. She looked at Augusto, then back at the mechanic. "The question isn't how you got this part. The question is why. If you were capable of putting dangerous garbage like this in here, what else have you replaced? How many other counterfeit parts are in this engine, Raimundo? And in how many other clients' cars, who paid a fortune for safety and originality, have you installed these time bombs?" The final question hung in the air, cold and terrible, hitting Augusto squarely. The dealership owner's face contorted into a mask of fury and panic. Wounded pride gave way to a visceral fear of ruin, of scandal, of headlines. "Answer, Raimundo!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "What the hell did you do to my car?" Pressed by Maya's cold logic on one side and his boss's terrified fury on the other, Raimundo began to crumble. "It was just this once, I swear. The pressure was enormous. The car wouldn't start. We were losing time and money," he pleaded, the words stumbling over each other. But Maya shook her head slowly, with the expression of someone hearing a childish lie. "No," she said with frightening certainty, "it wasn't just this once. This failure was designed to be subtle, to mimic a deep electronic problem and justify hours of labor and the replacement of expensive components like the ECU. It was made to confuse." Her eyes moved from the trembling mechanic back to the open engine, her brain already connecting the dots. "If your contact in Campinas is so good at supplying fake harnesses, I bet he has a very varied catalog." She leaned over the engine again, her hand hovering over the components, like a conductor about to lead, her eyes fixed on the ignition coils. "These here," she said, pointing to the set of 8 coils. "They look new, too clean. Clean in a way that doesn't match the 3 weeks of testing you said you did." She took out her cell phone, took a high-resolution photo, and zoomed in. "Here, the Bosch logo. The font is wrong. The letter O is a perfect circle. On the genuine part, it's slightly oval." She turned the phone to Augusto. The detail was minuscule, invisible to a layman, but for him, who had built his life around authenticity, it was a stab. He looked at his Ferrari, his symbol of status and power, And for the first time, he saw it as it truly was, a shiny shell stuffed with lies and fraud. The entire dealership seemed contaminated. The revelation about the ignition coils was just the beginning of the avalanche. With the fraud now exposed, Maya's mind operated with astonishing speed and precision, her X-ray gaze finding flaws that would go unnoticed by 99% of experts. She moved through the engine like a general inspecting her troops, pointing out the flaws with an indisputable authority. "The fuel injectors," she said, indicating the components with the tip of her pliers. "The plastic housing has a small molding burr here at the joint. The genuine Bosch part is perfectly smooth, saving cents in the manufacturing process." She moved to the other side. "The mass airflow sensors. Look at the serial number. It's a high-quality sticker, yes, but it's a sticker. The original part has the number laser engraved directly into the metal." With each new discovery, the atmosphere in the showroom grew heavier, more venomous. Augusto Mendes, the titan of the luxury automotive industry, staggered back and leaned against a Porsche Panamera, his face pale and sweaty. The narrator in his mind screamed the terrible truth. His car was not just broken, it was a walking fraud, a supercar shell stuffed with the cheapest and most dangerous parts on the market. The risk was not just financial. A fake injector could lock open, flood a cylinder with gasoline, and cause a catastrophic engine explosion at 300 kilometers per hour. That car was not an asset, it was a weapon pointed at its own owner. The betrayal from Raimundo, his trusted man for over a decade, was so deep it felt like a black hole in his chest, sucking out all the air and arrogance that had once filled him. The fury in Augusto's eyes was something primal, the rage of a king betrayed in his own castle. He straightened up, his body trembling, and took a step towards Raimundo, who was now cornered against a glass wall, panic turning him into a cornered animal. "You," Augusto growled, his voice low and lethal, "you tried to kill me. For money." It was the last straw. Raimundo collapsed, words pouring out in a desperate and pathetic confession. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The scheme was with the guys from Campinas. We'd take the cars for simple repairs, swap the original parts for this junk, and sell the genuine ones on the black market. No one had ever noticed. But your car went wrong. We couldn't get it to work. One thing led to another." He barely finished the sentence. The instant Augusto raised his cell phone, his trembling finger hovering over the police number, adrenaline took over Raimundo. With a wild cry, he shoved a tool cart towards two mechanics who were surrounding him, creating a split second of chaos. It was enough. He darted through the door leading to the workshop, a labyrinth of lifts and equipment he knew like the back of his hand. Shouts echoed through the showroom as some employees tried in vain to chase him. Amidst the pandemonium, Augusto stood still, cell phone in hand, the sound of an imaginary siren already ringing in his head. Beside him, Maya remained calm, the storm in person. Augusto finally brought the phone to his ear, his voice broken. "Police? My name is Augusto Mendes. I need to report a crime that was happening inside my own company." After the call, a heavy and strange silence descended upon Premium Motors. Raimundo's escape left a vacuum, and the chaos gave way to a funereal quiet. The few customers who remained watched from afar, no longer with contempt for Maya, but with the morbid fascination of someone witnessing a slow-motion train wreck. The employees, once aligned with their boss's arrogance, now huddled in corners, whispering in panic, each one mentally reassessing the cars they had worked on, the orders they had followed, afraid of being the next to fall. The showroom, once a temple of luxury and perfection, now looked like an elaborate crime scene, and the red Ferrari in the center was both the victim and the primary evidence. Augusto Mendes hung up the phone, and his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had settled on them. He was no longer the king on his marble throne. He was just a man haunted by the image of his own ruin. In his mind, a horror movie unfolded. The newspaper headlines, the client's lawyers, the revocation of his Ferrari license, the distrust in every future handshake. He looked at Maya. She wasn't smiling, not showing any sign of triumph. On the contrary, she had taken a small notepad from her pocket and with a pen had begun to write a list in a quick, precise handwriting. Amidst the emotional and logistical disaster, she was the only person who seemed to know what to do, the only one who was, in fact, working. Augusto approached her, his steps shuffling, devoid of the energy and power that had always characterized him. He stopped at a respectful distance, a deference that would have been unthinkable 30 minutes earlier. "The police are on their way," he said, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "They want the car as is, for forensics." He paused, looking at the list she was writing. "What? What are you doing?" Maya looked up from her notepad, and for the first time, Augusto saw the true depth of her intelligence, unclouded by humiliation. "I'm making a preliminary list of all the non-original parts I've visually identified and all the adjacent components that need to be checked for stress or collateral damage," she explained, with the simplicity of someone describing a cake recipe. "The police will do their job, but our bet, Mr. Mendez, was that I would fix the car. The discovery of this fraud does not nullify the agreement. It just makes it significantly more complex." She turned a page. "To honor my part, I will need an open purchase order in the Ferrari system with top priority. I will need 2 of your best mechanics, the ones not involved in this, to assist me with the disassembly. And I will need unrestricted access to your workshop, day and night, starting now." She was dictating the terms, not to an adversary, but to a desperate client. Augusto, seeing in her the only lifeline in his sea of disasters, just nodded, defeated. "You'll have it. Everything you need. Just fix this." The arrival of the police car was discreet, without sirens, but its imposing presence at the dealership entrance was like an official seal on the disaster. 2 uniformed officers and a middle-aged detective with a tired look that had seen it all entered the showroom. Augusto, shrunken and pale, tried to begin the explanation, but his voice failed, lost in a tangle of shame and anger. It was Maya who took the lead. With the same calm with which she had diagnosed the car, she guided the detective, whose name was Amaral, through each fraudulent part. She didn't use complex technical jargon. Instead, she explained the implications of each discovery with cutting clarity. This counterfeit wire created a resistance that made the electronic control unit think the engine was about to explode. "That's why it would cut the ignition," she explained, pointing to the melted electrical tape. "These fake ignition coils could overheat and cause a fire in the engine compartment. It's a miracle nothing worse happened." Detective Amaral, a man accustomed to dealing with lies and half-truths, listened with an attention that bordered on admiration. He saw before him not a victim or a bystander, but the key to unraveling the entire case. After photographing and documenting the initial evidence, he turned to Maya. "You will need to remove all these parts, correct? I need each one to be catalogued and handed over to forensics." He then looked at Augusto. "The car is cleared for repair, but it is officially part of a criminal investigation. Mr. Mendez, your cooperation will be essential." Augusto just nodded, mute. The order to move the Ferrari to the workshop was given, and for the first time, Maya walked ahead, leading the way to her true work environment. The Premium Motors workshop was a world apart from the showroom. Instead of marble, the floor was oil-stained concrete. Instead of silence and perfume, the air was thick with the smell of metal, rubber, and the distant sound of an impact wrench. Here, Maya seemed to grow. She tied her hair in a firm bun, put on a pair of nitrile gloves, and became the commander of the battlefield. Augusto assigned 2 of his most experienced mechanics, Flavio and Cesar, to help her. The distrust and resentment were palpable in their eyes, having to obey a woman, an outsider who had just destroyed the reputation of their workplace was a hard blow to their pride. Maya ignored the hostility. "Lift 4 now," she ordered, her voice echoing through the space. "Flavio, I want you to drain all the fluids. Oil, coolant, brake fluid. Everything will be sent for analysis. I want to know if they tampered with the lubricants too. Cesar, you're with me. You will photograph and label every component I remove, creating a double record for us and for the police." Flavio hesitated, about to argue, but the certainty in her tone made him shut up and get the equipment. Cesar, in turn, tried to assert his experience. "Ma'am, if we're going to remove the intake manifold, it's easier to use a long pry bar to release the rear connectors." Maya didn't even look at him. "No, the pry bar will force and break the plastic tabs on the connectors, which are probably already brittle. Use the long hook tool and pull firmly, but without twisting. Patience saves 1,000 reais on new connectors." The specificity of the instruction silenced him. With a loud click, the sound of the lift's locking mechanism engaging was heard, and the Ferrari began to rise, majestic and sick, beginning the most important surgery of its life. With the Ferrari suspended in the air, the real surgery began. Under the cold light of the workshop's neons, Maya's hands moved with a hypnotic precision. There was no brute force, only an economy of movement, and a profound knowledge that seemed almost intuitive. Each bolt of the intake manifold was loosened in the exact sequence to prevent warping the part. Each electrical connector was unplugged with the right tool, emitting a soft click of obedience. Flavio and Cesar watched, initially with their arms crossed, ready to point out the slightest mistake. But as Maya progressed, their skepticism turned into silent astonishment. Upon removing the intake manifold, which she had already identified as fake, a new layer of the fraud was revealed. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the gasket. "Cardboard. It was supposed to be a rubberized metal gasket. This would cause a vacuum leak in the engine, one that would change intensity with the temperature. Any mechanic would spend months looking for an electronic ghost without ever finding it." Cesar took the cardboard gasket, feeling the cheap, fragile texture in his fingers. It was sabotage so ingenious in its simplicity that it was diabolical. With each part removed, a new atrocity was discovered. Spark. Plugs of a cheap brand, painted to look like the original iridium ones. A coolant temperature sensor that had been subtly bent to always provide an incorrect reading. The pile of fraudulent parts grew on a tray, a shameful monument to Raimundo's greed. The hours dragged on, turning afternoon into night. The rest of the dealership plunged into darkness, but the bay of Lift 4 remained an island of intense light and feverish work. Augusto Mendez had appeared a few times, watching from a distance, like a ghost in his own house, before disappearing into his office. Maya, however, did not stop. Fueled by bottles of water and strong coffee that one of the younger employees brought every hour, she maintained a relentless pace. Her energy seemed inexhaustible, born not of physical strength, but of a determination forged in 15 years of frustration. She was finally in her element, free to do what she was born to do, and every fake part she removed was like pulling a weed from a garden she had sworn to protect. At one point, as she struggled to maneuver the heavy alternator out of its tight bracket, Cesar, without her asking, positioned himself beside her and helped support the weight. "I'll hold it, ma'am. Just point to where it goes." There was no more sarcasm in his voice, only cooperation. Later, it was Flavio who, seeing her hands completely black with grease as she tried to consult a diagram on the tablet, wiped the screen with a cloth without saying a word. Respect was not asked for or imposed, it was earned. At the end of the night, looking at the pile of junk they had removed from an engine that should have been perfect, Flavio shook his head and said, his voice low and full of a professional anger, "This isn't mechanics. This is a crime against the engine. At that moment, they were no longer Augusto's men helping a stranger. They were Maya's team. The first light of morning filtered through the workshop's high windows, painting the concrete floor with golden stripes. The scene was of a meticulously fought battle. The Ferrari, emptied and vulnerable on its pedestal, looked like the skeleton of a great beast. Around it, organized trays held hundreds of parts, every bolt and nut in its proper place. And on a separate table, the pile of shame, the counterfeit parts, a heap of cheap metal and shoddy plastic. Flavio and Cesar dozed in chairs, exhausted, but Maya remained on her feet. Before her, on a clean workbench, were the dealership's tablet and her notepad. During the quietest hours of the dawn, while the others rested, she had not only listed the necessary parts, she had architected the car's resurrection. She cross-referenced each component with the latest Ferrari service bulletins, identifying updated and improved versions of certain parts. She drew a flowchart for assembly, a logical sequence that would ensure each system was tested individually before being integrated into the whole. Her goal, at that moment, had transcended the bet. She wouldn't just fix the car, she would transform it into the most perfect and reliable version it could be, a standard of excellence that would shame the state in which it arrived. When Augusto entered the workshop, his face haggard and his eyes red from lack of sleep, he saw the scene and stopped. He saw the shell of his car and the tireless determination of the woman he had humiliated. Maya looked up and beckoned him over with a gesture. "Mr. Mendez, this is the final list." Augusto approached and took the tablet she offered him. The list of parts seemed endless, and the preliminary costs at the bottom of the screen were astronomical, enough to buy a new luxury car. Each line was a stab to his pride and his bank account. Injectors, coils, sensors, modules, entire wiring harnesses, gaskets, hoses. The list went on. In the past, he would have shouted, questioned every item, looked for alternatives. He would have accused the supplier of inflating the prices. But now, he saw that list differently. Every original part he bought would be a brick in rebuilding his company's integrity. Every euro spent would be an act of penance for the fraud that had flourished under his negligent supervision. It was the price of his redemption. Without a word, he turned and walked towards his glass-walled office, which was on a mezzanine overlooking the workshop. Maya, Flavio, and Cesar watched him in silence. They saw him sit in his leather chair, turn on his computer, and access the exclusive Ferrari portal for partners, a system protected by layers of security and trust. With Maya's tablet beside him, he began to transfer the order, line by line, without hesitation. Each click was a surrender to her expertise. Finally, after almost half an hour of typing, he moved the cursor over the final button. With one last look at the woman below, he clicked "Confirm Urgent Order." The sound of the click, inaudible in the workshop, seemed to echo like thunder, sealing the fate of the bet, the car, and Premium Motors itself. Help was on the way. The next 2 days were an exercise in patience and preparation. The parts order, confirmed and with maximum urgency status, was in transit, crossing the Atlantic Ocean on a cargo flight coming directly from Maranello, Italy. The workshop, once a place of tension and distrust, had been transformed into a sanctuary of focused work. While the outside world began to bubble with the first rumors of the scandal, inside Premium Motors, Maya's team operated in a bubble of concentration. She did not allow the waiting time to be a time of rest. Instead, she began what she called forensic decontamination. With Flavio and Cesar now as her loyal disciples, she instructed them to clean every inch of the engine bay and adjacent systems. It was not an aesthetic cleaning. She explained each step with the precision of a teacher. Microscopic residues from the low-quality plastics and metals of the fake parts may have entered the oil. Galleries, the fuel lines. If a fragment of these blocks are ducked, the new engine will fail in minutes. We are going to clean everything as if it were an operating room before a heart transplant. They spent hours washing, brushing, and inspecting every component that would be reused, developing a silent camaraderie, united by the smell of solvent and the common goal. For the first time in years, Maya did not feel like an intruder or a competitor, but the leader of a team that respected her for her mind and not for what they expected of her. While the meticulous cleaning was happening in the heart of the workshop, the shockwaves of Maya's discovery spread. Augusto Mendez lived entrenched in his glass office, the phone glued to his ear in tense conversations with lawyers. Across the street, a local TV station's van kept a discreet vigil, a vulture waiting for the news carcass to rot in public. Online forums for luxury car enthusiasts buzzed with speculation about the crisis at premium motors. But something in Augusto had changed. Between panic calls, he spent long periods just watching. From his glass fortress, he saw Maya and her team working with a synergy and dedication he had never witnessed in his own company. He saw Flavio's patience as he polished a part, Cesar's concentration as he tested the continuity of a wiring harness, and Maya's calm leadership, which guided everything with an authority that came not from a title, but from pure, undeniable knowledge. He began to realize that the excellence he so boasted of selling was not in the shine of the marble or the cut of his suits. It was there, in the grease, in the dirt, in the tireless pursuit of technical perfection, that this woman, whom he had humiliated, personified. One late afternoon, he came down not with orders, but with a tray of espresso cups. He approached Maya as she inspected the engine block. "Maya, why do this manually?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious. "We have computerized grinders that would do this with micron precision." Maya wiped her hand on a rag and answered without arrogance. "The machine follows orders, Augusto. The hand feels the history of the metal, a micro crack, a slight distortion from heat. The hand confirms what the eyes and machines cannot see." On the morning of the third day, a truck from an international shipping company, different from the local suppliers, slowly entered the dealership's courtyard. On its side, a discreet logo indicated it was a high-security logistics service. The rear door opened, revealing not cardboard boxes, but 4 large light wood crates, each stamped with Ferrari's iconic prancing horse. The arrival of the parts was a solemn event. Augusto, Maya, Flavio, and Cesar came out to receive the shipment, and the drivers, with clipboards and the air of people transporting the crown jewels, supervised the unloading. Using a forklift, the crates were carefully placed in the center of the workshop. With a crowbar, Cesar opened the first one. The smell of wood and new parts filled the air. Inside, nestled in high-density foam, was a complete wiring harness for the engine, a complex and beautiful tangle of wires and connectors, each one perfect. In contrast to the pile of junk on the table of shame, this was the purest form of authenticity. Maya picked up her tablet, the checklist ready. "Let's start the inventory. I want every serial number checked. We're not installing anything until we're sure everything is 100% correct." For 2 more hours, the trio worked, unpacking and verifying every sensor, every module, every bolt, under the watchful eye of Augusto, who was witnessing the rebirth of his company, one part at a time. With the inventory complete and every part confirmed, a new energy took over the workshop. The anxiety of waiting gave way to the excitement of a new beginning. The air vibrated with the promise of reconstruction. Maya washed her hands once more and put on a new pair of gloves. "Let's start with the nervous system," she announced, picking up the new, complex wiring harness. The piece was a work of art, and she handled it with the respect it deserved. With Flavio and Cesar assisting, she began to route the wiring through the engine bay, following the exact path designed by the engineers in Maranello. Each connector fit into its respective sensor with a solid, satisfying click, a sound of perfection that was music to the mechanic's ears. It was the sound of quality, of precision, the exact opposite of the loose fittings and makeshift fixes they had removed. The team now moved in a silent dance of professionalism. While Maya focused on the installation, Flavio was already separating and organizing the next sequence of parts dictated by her plan, and Cesar handed her the exact tool a second before she needed it. They were no longer just helpers. They were an extension of her hands and mind. By the end of that first day of assembly, the entire new fuel injection and ignition system was in place. The genuine parts shone against the meticulously cleaned engine block, a vision of order and restored potential. It was the first concrete step in bringing the beast back to life, stronger than ever. The days that followed were a symphony of mechanics and precision. The Premium Motors workshop, once a place of shortcuts and deceit, became a temple of correct methodology. Under Maya's direction, the heart of the Ferrari began to be rebuilt. The engine heads, with their now perfect surfaces, were reinstalled with multi-layer gaskets, and each bolt was tightened in a cross pattern with a digital torque wrench that emitted a soft beep upon reaching the exact torque specification. There was no rush, only an absolute focus on doing it right. Flavio and Cesar, now converts to Maya's philosophy, worked with a renewed devotion. They felt a pride in their craft that had been stifled under Raimundo's management. They were cleaning, not just an engine, but the stain that the fraud had left on their profession. Maya, in turn, led not just with orders, but with teachings. When applying a specific assembly compound to a thread, she would explain, "This anti-seize compound ensures that, even under the extreme heat of the turbos, this part can be easily removed 10 years from now during the next major maintenance. We are doing a job that respects the car's future and the next mechanic who looks at it." It was a work philosophy, based on integrity and respect, concepts that Augusto, watching from afar, was beginning to understand for the first time. Finally, the day came, or rather, the night before the day. The Ferrari was whole again. The engine, now a collage of new and shiny parts, was complete. All the fluids, synthetic oil of the highest specification, coolant, brake fluid, had been added. The car came down from the lift and rested on its own wheels, looking exactly the same as before on the outside, but being a completely different creature on the inside. The atmosphere in the workshop was electric, a mixture of exhaustion and expectation. Tomorrow would be the test. Tomorrow, they would try to start the engine. That night, as the team did a final visual check, Augusto approached. He no longer had the posture of a king, but that of a man who had been through an ordeal and emerged different. He looked at the dedication on his employees' faces and at Maya's concentrated calm. "I've spent the last few days watching you," he began, his voice low and sincere, stripped of all arrogance. "I built an empire based on image, on luxury, on status. I thought that was value, but the real value is here, in the dedication, in the honesty of tightening a bolt correctly when no one is looking." He turned to Maya. "Tomorrow, when you go to start it, our bet no longer exists. The money, the 100,000 Ries, it's already yours. You don't need to prove anything else. You not only identified the problem, you showed me what my company should have been from the beginning. You saved it. Regardless of what happens when you turn that key, you have already won." Maya heard Augusto's words and just nodded, a silent gesture of acknowledgement. His confession was the poetic justice the world demanded, and the money was the tool that would give her the freedom to build her future. But her personal validation, the true reward her engineer's heart craved, would not come from an apology or a bank transfer. It would come from the machine itself. The final proof of her competence would be the roar of that engine, the symphony of the 12 cylinders working in perfect harmony. The next morning, an almost sacred silence hung over the workshop. Flavio and Cesar were positioned at a respectful distance, their hands sweating, their hearts pounding. Augusto was leaning against a pillar, his face a mixture of hope and fear. Maya, however, was in her private sanctuary of calm. She connected her Laptop to the Ferrari's diagnostic port, her eyes fixed on the torrent of data flowing to the screen. She wasn't just going to turn the key, she was going to monitor the beast's awakening, cell by cell. Fuel line pressure, 5 bar, stable, she murmured to herself, more to calm the team than out of necessity. Battery voltage, 12.6 volts, solid as a rock. All sensors are online, reporting within nominal parameters. The system is ready. She looked up at Flavio and Cesar and gave them a brief, confident nod. It was time. She slid into the driver's seat, the scent of leather and cleanliness filling her senses, her now clean hands wrapped around the carbon fiber steering wheel. Her thumb hovered over the red start button, the epicenter of all the hopes and fears in that room. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a split second, and pressed the button. For an instant that felt like an eternity, there was only the high-pitched whining sound of the starter motor turning. And then it happened. It wasn't a cough, it wasn't a sputter. It was a sudden, violent, and glorious explosion of pure sound. The V8 engine didn't just start, it detonated to life with a roar so clean, so fierce, and so perfect that it made the workshop floor vibrate. It was a guttural, angry baritone, the unmistakable sound of pure, unrestricted power, the scream of a beast that had been healed and freed from its cage of fake parts. Flavio and Cesar hugged each other, tears of relief and pride streaming down their grease-stained faces. Augusto remained motionless, his mouth agape, as a single, silent tear rolled down his cheek. It was the sound of his second chance, the sound of his redemption. Maya didn't look at them. Her eyes remained fixed on the laptop screen, where every graph, every number, showed a system in perfect harmony. The engine now settled into an idle, a low, menacing purr, so smooth that a coin could be balanced on it. A small, genuine, and deeply satisfied smile finally spread. Across her face, the machine had answered. The victory was absolute. Maya let the engine run for exactly 5 minutes, enough time for all systems to reach their ideal operating temperature and for the sound of that controlled power to wash over everyone's soul in the workshop. Every graph on her laptop showed a green, stable, and perfect line. It was the picture of mechanical health. With a final touch, she turned off the engine. The silence that followed was completely different from the tense silence before. It was a quietness filled with peace, with a mission accomplished, the silence that comes after the storm. Augusto was the first to move. He approached the car, not as the owner, but as a pilgrim before an altar. He ran his hand over the hood, as if he could feel the new life pulsing within. He began. His voice choked, struggling to find the words. I don't know how to thank you. I humiliated you. I judged you and I challenged you. And you responded not just by fixing a car, but by rebuilding the very foundation of my company. You taught me a lesson about honor and integrity that I will carry for the rest of my life. Maya finally got out of the car, wiping her hands on a cloth. She looked at the transformed man before her and allowed herself a small smile. I did the job. The car is as it should be. Now, about the terms of our bet, Augusto laughed, a genuine sound with no trace of mockery. The bet, he said, shaking his head as if speaking of a distant, foolish memory. That was the delusion of an arrogant man. The 100,000 reais is the least of my debts to you. I've already ordered the transfer, but this can't end here. I don't need you to fix a car, Maya. I need you to fix premium motors. He gestured towards the workshop, towards Flavio and Cesar, who were looking on with admiration. I watched you work. I saw how you turned two skeptical mechanics into a loyal and dedicated team. I saw a natural-born leader, a strategist, a mentor. I saw the soul that was missing from this place. He looked her in the eyes, the seriousness on his face absolute. I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a partnership. I want you to be the technical partner of Premium Motors. I want you to take charge of all after-sales operations, to implement your methods, your philosophy. I want you to turn this place into the gold standard of automotive excellence and integrity in Brazil. The name will remain Premium Motors, but its soul, the guarantee of quality, will be you. The proposal hung in the air, so grand and unexpected that Maya felt the floor disappear from under her feet. She had come for an 80 real part, and now they were offering her the keys to the kingdom. The initial shock of Augusto's proposal gave way to an icy clarity in Maya's mind. For 15 long years, she had fought for a simple chance to be heard, to have her work respected, to not be sabotaged. She had grown so accustomed to fighting to survive within the system that the idea of commanding the system was almost dizzying. In her heart, a cynical voice, forged in years of disappointment, warned her to be careful, that the offer was too good to be true. But then she looked at Augusto's face, a man visibly broken and rebuilt by the experience. She looked at Flavio and Cesar, whose eyes shone with hope, and she looked at the Ferrari, the silent trophy of her battle. She realized that this moment was bigger than a job, bigger than personal. Revenge. It was a door that, if she opened it, she could keep open for many others after her. After a long silence that left Augusto in agony, she finally spoke, her voice firm and heavy with the weight of her journey. "I accept your offer, Augusto, but on my terms." She took a step forward, becoming his equal. "I won't just be a manager, I will be an agent of change. I want full autonomy to restructure the technical DNA of this company. We will create the most advanced diagnostic training and program in the country right here. And I want a commitment from you in writing that at least 40% of new hires for the technical area at all levels will be women. I will get them personally. The engineers, the mechanics, the technicians, who, like me, were underestimated and ignored by men like you used to be." Far from being offended by the condition and the final barb, Augusto broke into a wide, relieved smile. Her demands were not obstacles, they were confirmation that he had chosen the right person. She wasn't thinking of herself, but of building a legacy. She had a vision, and it was a vision that could, in fact, save his company from mediocrity and dishonor. "Your conditions are my new company policy," he declared, his voice sounding stronger and more convicted than at any time in the past few days. "You will have carte blanche, Maya. Budget, authority, everything. Build what you know is right." He extended his hand, the same hand that days before had dismissed her with a gesture of disdain. Now it was offered in a gesture of respect and supplication. "Do we have a deal, partner?" Maya looked at his hand, then at her own, which still held traces of grease under the nails, the marks of her true worth. She shook Augusto's hand firmly. "We have a deal, partner." The next day, the first visible change happened. A temporary but imposing sign was placed at the entrance to the workshop. Premium Motors Technical Center of Excellence, under the direction of Maya Silva. Inside, Maya was already at a table with Flavio and Cesar, whom she immediately promoted to team leaders and instructors, designing the curriculum for the new training program. The sound of her voice echoed through the space, no longer diagnosing a broken engine, but building the engine of a new future. Maya's first month in charge was a silent but overwhelming revolution. The old replace parts until it's fixed mentality was eradicated. In its place, the Maya philosophy was born. Mornings were dedicated to intensive training sessions for the entire technical team. In a classroom that Augusto had hastily built next to the workshop, Maya, Flavio, and Cesar taught about oscilloscopes, complex electrical diagrams, and, most importantly, the art of differential diagnosis. She taught them to think like detectives, to listen to the story the car was telling through its data. Afternoons were for practice, applying the theory to clients' cars, where the first order was, no longer be fast, but be right. And true to her word, the change in culture went beyond methods. 2 weeks after taking over, the first new hires arrived. Lucia, a young, recently graduated mechatronics engineer whose brilliant resume had been ignored by a dozen workshops, and Clara, an experienced mechanic with over 10 years in the field, who had left the profession after suffering harassment and discredit at her last job. Maya welcomed them, not as a charitable gesture, but as the acquisition of valuable talents that the stupid market had discarded. Under her mentorship, they flourished, and the workshop, once a boys' club, began to look like the future. The news about the transformation at Premium Motors spread like a controlled fire. Initially, it was whispers in gentlemen's clubs and collectors' WhatsApp groups. The story of Raimundo's fraud leaked out, but was quickly overshadowed by the even more powerful narrative of the genius engineer who not only discovered everything but took control and was performing miracles. The workshop's reputation, which had been on the verge of ruin, began to change. It ceased to be the site of a scandal and became the home of the mage of engines, the only person in the country one could trust for an honest diagnosis. It was then that a new type of client began to appear. Not the newly rich wanting to show off their new cars, but serious collectors, owners of mechanical rarities with impossible problems. One day, a nationally renowned businessman entered the dealership and asked to speak with Maya. He didn't want to buy a car. He had a 1971 Lamborghini Miura, a legend that had been sitting for 5 years, an enigma that the country's best experts couldn't decipher. He had heard the legend of Maya and had come to her as his last hope. Augusto, now acting as the brand's true ambassador, greeted him with a new speech. "Our cars in the showroom are beautiful," he would tell clients, "but the true work of art, of Premium Motors, our guarantee of perfection, is in there." He would point to the workshop, and she is led by engineer Silva. The orange Lamborghini Miura arrived on a closed trailer, and when it was revealed under the workshop lights, even Maya felt a shiver. It was one of the most beautiful machines ever created, an automotive legend. But it was a sick legend. The entire team gathered around, looking at the car with a mixture of reverence and awe. This was not a modern supercar with electronic diagnostics. It was a purely mechanical analog beast, powered by 12 cylinders and 6 temperamental carburetors. While the others saw a ghost, Maya saw a system. For 2 whole days, she didn't touch a single tool. Instead, she immersed herself in the car's original schematics, service manuals, and historical records, learning the language of that specific machine. Only then did she begin the physical diagnosis, a methodical process that lasted another 3 days. She found not one single major fault, but a conspiracy of small problems that masked each other. A subtle deformation in the distributor shaft, almost imperceptible, the result of an overheating event that occurred decades ago, which altered the ignition timing at high revs. This, combined with carburetor jets that, in a previous restoration, had been replaced with a slightly wrong size, creating an overly rich mixture that the incorrect ignition timing couldn't burn. It was a vicious cycle of errors, a puzzle that could only be solved by someone who saw the engine as a living, interconnected organism. The solution required not just knowledge, but artistry. Maya, working side by side with Lucia and Clara in a display of mentorship, manually rectified the distributor and machined new jets to the exact size, a part that no longer existed on the market. After a week of intense work, the moment of truth arrived. Without the drama of the Ferrari, only with the calm confidence of a master, Maya turned the key. The Miura's V12 engine, after 5 years of silence, coughed once and then exploded into a glorious, perfectly tuned symphony, a sound that made time stand still. The car's owner, a man who had already lost hope, wept openly upon hearing it. The news of the miracle of the Miura spread like wildfire through the automotive community, solidifying Maya's reputation as a living legend. The success brought a new level of prestige and profitability to Premium Motors. Months later, in Maya's new office next to Augusto's, he showed her the balance sheets. The service division's profits had tripled. "What you've built here, Maya, is bigger than this company," he said, amazed. Maya looked at the numbers. "This money," she said thoughtfully, "can do more than sit in the bank. It can have a purpose." Augusto smiled, as his mind was in the same place. "I agree. What if we create a fund? A percentage from every special project you lead?" Maya looked at Lucia and Clara, who were now leading their own diagnostic teams in the workshop, and the final idea took shape in her mind, clear and powerful. The Premium Motors Foundation for Women in Mechanics, to fund scholarships, tools, and opportunities for the next generations of women who love machines. The idea of the foundation, once born, became Augusto's new obsession and Maya's life mission. While she continued to oversee the revolution in the workshop, Augusto dived headfirst into the bureaucracy to turn the vision into reality. He mobilized his team of elite lawyers and accountants, men accustomed to mergers and acquisitions, and tasked them with creating the legal structure for the Premium Motors Foundation for Women in Mechanics. For Augusto, every signed document, every legal requirement met, was an act of redemption. He found a new purpose, not in accumulating wealth, but in distributing it intelligently to build a legacy. While he erected the structure, Maya built the foundation's soul. She spent sleepless nights not designing an engine repair, but the future of dozens of young women. She designed the selection process for the scholarships, ensuring it measured not just academic performance, but passion, resilience, and creativity. There were essays on the hardest repair you've ever done and describe the machine of your dreams. Together with Lucia and Clara, who were now her trusted advisors on the committee, she began to read the hundreds of applications that arrived from all over Brazil, each telling a story of talent fighting against adversity. Finally, the day of the official announcement arrived. On a podium set up in the showroom, in front of the now iconic Ferrari, Augusto told his story of humiliation and learning to the press. Then he called Maya, who, with her calm and powerful authenticity, captivated everyone by speaking not of cars, but of wasted human potential. The impact of the announcement was immediate and profound. The story of the engineer who turned her greatest humiliator into her greatest ally, and who was now using her success to lift up other women, became a national phenomenon. But the real victory came weeks later, with the arrival of the Foundation's first class of scholarship recipients. They were 5 young women, each a diamond in the rough. There was Beatriz, from a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais, who learned mechanics by fixing her family's only tractor. There was Juliana, from Rio de Janeiro, who built a functional go-kart from junkyard parts. They arrived at Premium Motors with wide eyes, nervous and awestruck. Maya greeted them at the door, not as a distant CEO, but as a welcoming mentor. "Welcome to your home," she said, guiding them through the immaculate workshop. "Every tool, every lift, every engine you see here is a resource for your learning. There are no stupid questions. The only thing I demand is passion and hard work. We want you to become the best, and that in the future you help the next, one who comes after you." Their arrival injected new life into the workshop. The older mechanics, like Flavio and Cesar, proudly took on the role of mentors, sharing decades of knowledge. The workshop ceased to be just a business and became a vibrant ecosystem of learning and teaching, a place where cars were fixed and futures were built. The profit on Augusto's balance sheets was impressive, but the real value was there, in the sparkle in those young women's eyes, the living proof that the change was real and lasting. The teaching model Maya implemented was a total immersion. She believed that theory without immediate practice was useless, so each of the 5 scholarship students was paired with a senior mechanic in a weekly rotation system. The rule was clear: the student was primarily responsible for the diagnosis. Under the watchful eye of her mentor, she was to examine the car, collect the data, consult the manuals, and at the end, present a complete report with her hypothesis and a repair plan directly to Maya. The responsibility was immense, but the learning was exponential. Beatrice, the young woman from Minas Gerais, accustomed to the rough mechanics of tractors, felt this pressure when facing the engine of a modern Porsche 911. In front of an oscilloscope screen, with its complex digital waves, she felt lost. Flavio, her mentor for the week, noticed her hesitation. Instead of giving her the answer, he sat down beside her. "Don't think of it as electronics, Beatrice. Think of it as music. Each cylinder is a drum. The screen is just showing the rhythm of the beat. See this little flaw in the wave of cylinder 3. It's a drum beating out of time. Now our job is to find out why." This approach, which translated the complex into the fundamental, opened Beatrice's mind. She was no longer afraid of technology. She was learning to listen to a new song. Maya, for her part, reviewed each report, questioning, challenging and validating the work of each pair, ensuring that the standard of excellence was maintained while the new generation was forged in the heat of real work. This new culture, however, would soon face its first external test. A powerful businessman, a longtime client of the dealership, and a man who personified the arrogance that once belonged to Augusto, brought in his new Mercedes S-Class with a frustrating, intermittent electrical problem. Upon being informed by one of the service consultants that his car would be diagnosed by the duo of Juliana and Cesar, he exploded. He stormed into Augusto's office unannounced. "Augusto, what kind of joke is this? I pay top dollar for your service, and you put an intern and some random mechanic to work on my car. I demand that your star engineer, that Maya woman, handle this personally, now." The Augusto of months ago would have bowed, apologized profusely, and catered to the client's whim. But the man facing him now was different. Augusto listened to the complaint in silence, and when the businessman finished, he responded with unshakable calm. "Mr. Almeida, the intern is one of the most promising young women I've ever seen, and the random mechanic is my team leader and one of the most experienced men in the industry. Both work under my system, which is Engineer Silva's system. Here, we don't sell one person's talent. We sell a process of excellence. I ask that you trust our process." The businessman, shocked by the firmness, grumbled, but agreed to wait. 2 hours later, Juliana, feeling the weight of the trust placed in her, found a tiny, loose grounding wire behind the dashboard, the cause of the problem. The car was returned to its owner, perfectly repaired in record time. The businessman didn't apologize, but the silence and the respectful nod he gave as he left were worth more than any words. The culture had been tested and prevailed. A year after the first class arrived, the Premium Motors Workshop paused for an afternoon for an unprecedented event, the graduation ceremony for the first Foundation Scholarship recipients. There were no caps or gowns, but the emotion was palpable. The 5 young women, now transformed into confident and skilled technicians, received a certificate and a professional tool case personalized with their names from Maya. Their families, who had come from all corners of Brazil, watched with tears in their eyes. Beatrice's mother, who had only known her daughter covered in the red dust of the fields, now saw her being applauded as an expert in one of the most luxurious dealerships in the country. Maya's goal was never to retain all the talent, but to spread it like seeds in the wind. And so it was. Beatrice accepted an offer to lead the new electronic diagnostics division of an agricultural machinery giant in her state, bringing cutting-edge knowledge back to her roots. Juliana, with her calm under pressure, was hired by a stock car racing team. The other 3 were immediately absorbed by rival dealerships, which now coveted the professionals trained under the Maya standard. The foundation was not just training mechanics, it was exporting a new work philosophy to the entire industry. This real and measurable success attracted the attention of the major media, and a national television program scheduled a cover story on the woman who was quietly revolutionizing one of the country's most masculine sectors. The interview was conducted by one of Brazil's most respected Journalists. She had expected to find an executive in a power suit, but she found Maya in her natural habitat, the workshop, wearing a clean jumpsuit, with the smell of metal and oil still lingering in the air. Seated on benches next to a partially disassembled Maserati engine, the journalist asked her the key question: what's the secret? How did you transform a business on the brink of scandal into a model of success and social innovation? Maya's answer was as precise and logical as her diagnoses. "There is no secret," she said, her voice calm and confident. "We just stopped looking for heroes and started building a system. An engine doesn't work because of a single genius part. It works because hundreds of components do their job perfectly in harmony. Human talent is the same. It's everywhere. What's missing most of the time isn't talent. What's missing is opportunity, method, and an environment that cultivates that talent instead of crushing it out of arrogance or prejudice." She explained how the industry had become addicted to quick fixes, swapping expensive parts instead of investing time to find the root cause. The story aired on a Sunday night and had a seismic impact. The Maya philosophy became a topic of debate not only in the automotive sector, but in business schools and on the boards of large companies. Maya Silva was ceasing to be a legend of mechanics and becoming an unexpected guru of management and leadership. Maya's fame and her management philosophy transcended Brazil's borders. Articles about the Maya model of excellence were translated and published in business and engineering magazines around the world. The story of the woman who tamed the Ferrari and rebuilt a company based on integrity was too powerful a narrative to be contained. About 18 months after the bet that changed her life, an envelope with an international postmark arrived at her desk at Premium Motors. It wasn't from a supplier or a client. It was from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, her alma mater. The letter, written personally by the Dean of the School of Engineering, formally invited her to be the keynote speaker at that year's graduation ceremony. The invitation praised her remarkable contribution to practical engineering and her inspiring leadership in promoting diversity and meritocracy in traditionally closed fields. It was the ultimate recognition. The place that had given her the knowledge was now calling her back, so she could teach the most important lesson of all, that of resilience. On her departure for the trip, the entire workshop stopped. Augusto, Flavio, Cesar, and the new generation of technicians she was training applauded her, everyone's eyes shining with pride for their mentor, boss, and friend. Before her speech, MIT organized a networking event for alumni and industry partners. Maya, as the guest of honor, was talking with the dean and other professors when she felt a fixed gaze on her. She turned, and her heart skipped a beat, not of fear, but of a cold, distant recognition. Standing a few meters away, looking older, more tired, and considerably less imposing, was the man who, almost 2 decades earlier, had stolen the credit for her first major project and fired her to cover up his own incompetence. He was the architect of her exile, the reason for her years of struggle. He recognized her at the same instant, shock written on his face as he connected the young engineer he had discarded with the event's celebrated speaker. With a forced, fawning smile, he approached. "Maya, what an unbelievable coincidence. I always knew you would be successful. I always said you had a special talent." He lied, his voice full of a false camaraderie. Maya stared at him, and in her gaze there was no anger or desire for revenge. There was only the vacuum of indifference. He was a ghost from a past that no longer belonged to her. She looked him up and down, tilted her head slightly, and replied, with a glacial politeness that was sharper than any insult, "Pardon me, do I know you, sir? Your face is not familiar to me." With that said, she turned back to the dean, resuming her conversation and leaving her old tormentor standing in the middle of the hall, an invisible man, completely erased from her history by the magnitude of her own success. The next day, the great auditorium at MIT was pulsating with the energy of thousands of future engineers, scientists, and innovators. The air was charged with hope, pride, and that nervousness that precedes the start of a new life. Backstage, Maya watched the crowd through a crack in the curtain. She didn't feel anxiety, but a deep sense of purpose. Every young, hopeful face in the audience was a reminder of why her journey mattered. The dean of the School of Engineering took the podium and, after the initial greetings, began to introduce her. His presentation went far beyond listing her accomplishments. Engineering, at its core, is the art of solving problems, the dean said. Our speaker today teaches us that the most difficult problems are rarely just in the circuits or the structures. Sometimes they are in the human systems, in prejudice, in culture. Maya Silva not only solved one of the most complex mechanical puzzles we have ever seen, but she also diagnosed and repaired a broken corporate culture, transforming it into a model of integrity and inclusion. She reminds us that our greatest calling as engineers is to apply our knowledge to build not just things, but a more just world. When her name was announced, the auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. Maya walked to the center of the stage, a figure of calm and strength, the living embodiment of resilience. Maya adjusted the microphone, looked out at the vast audience, and smiled. Good morning. When I was 8 years old, I took apart my grandmother's radio because I didn't understand how music came out of a box. It took me 3 days, but I fixed it. That day, I didn't just learn about transistors and capacitors. I learned that the deepest joy comes from understanding and fixing what is broken. She paused, letting the simplicity of the story sink in. Today, you are the best in the world at understanding complex systems. But I ask you to remember that the most important systems are not the ones you studied in books. They are the systems of people, the work cultures, the structures of opportunity. They break too. And when they do, don't look for shortcuts. Disassemble the problem. Find the faulty part, whether it's a flawed process or an ingrained injustice. Diagnose the root cause and fix it with integrity. She looked directly at the young people before her. Your value will not be measured by your salary, but by the quality of your work when no one is looking, by the honesty to admit a mistake, by the courage to defend an idea, and most importantly, when you achieve success, don't build walls around it. Build bridges. Use your power to open doors for others who have the talent, but not the opportunity. The most incredible machine you will ever design will be a legacy of kindness and shared progress. Congratulations, class. Now, go and fix the world. When Maya returned to Brazil, there was no press conference at the airport. Her reception was far more meaningful. It took place in the workshop, her true home. As she entered, she was met by an explosion of applause and whistles. Augusto, Flavio, Cesar, and all the classes of Foundation Scholarship recipients were there. High above, hung between two lifts, a hand-painted banner with clumsy but affectionate letters read, "Welcome back, our inspiration." They had watched her speech live, projected onto one of the workshop walls, and the pride they felt was immense. As she walked through her domain, she saw proof that her system no longer depended on her. Lucia, now a senior diagnostic engineer, confidently led a team unraveling a complex problem in an electric car. In another corner, Cesar was co-mentoring a new student, using the same music of the engine analogy that Flavio had used with Beatrice. The culture she had created was alive, breathing, and multiplying on its own. Augusto pulled her into a corner, his eyes shining. "Maya, you won't believe it. Since your speech aired, my phone won't stop ringing. And it's not clients, it's CEOs from other industries, textiles, pharmaceuticals, technology. They all want to know how to implement the Maya model in their companies. I think our next venture will be in management consulting." A few years passed, and the dust of fame settled, giving way to a new and prosperous normal. A Tuesday morning, 5 years after that fateful bet, revealed the true fruit of Maya's labor. The Premium Motors Technical Center of Excellence was a renowned institution. The facilities had expanded, financed by profits and donations from admirers of the foundation. The workshop was a ballet of efficiency and collaboration. Women and men, young and old, worked side by side, the predominant sound not being hammers and impact wrenches, but technical dialogue and the soft beep of diagnostic equipment. The impossible cars continued to arrive from all over the continent, but now they were welcomed not as crises, but as welcome puzzles, challenges that kept the team sharp and engaged. And at the center of it all was Maya. She had a stylish office, but she rarely used it. Her real workbench remained the counter next to whatever engine she was working on. That morning, she was bent over the engine of a rare 1960s Alfa Romeo, her hands covered in grease, working with a third-year scholarship student. There was an expression of pure joy and concentration on her face. She had achieved something few manage. After fixing the system, she had earned the right to simply enjoy the work she loved, surrounded by a community she had built herself. In an environment of respect, she had forged herself. The transformation of the team was as profound as that of the engines they repaired. Augusto Mendes, now with grayer hair and a serene smile, was rarely seen negotiating the price of a car. His passion had become the foundation. That same morning, he was guiding a group of industrialists on a tour. He wasn't showing them the cars, but the people. That's Flavio, co-author of our diagnostics manual, which is now required reading in 3 technical schools, he would say, pointing to the veteran mechanic patiently explaining a concept to a student. And that is Dr. Lucia, our first scholarship recipient, who today runs our new research division for electric vehicles. Our greatest asset isn't in this showroom. It's in the intelligence and dedication of our people. Flavio and Cesar, the former skeptical guardians, had become the pillars of the mentoring culture, wise and patient grandfathers to the new generations. They found a satisfaction in teaching they had never imagined, a legacy that went beyond any repair they had ever made. The workshop was no longer a workplace, it was a family forged in grease and mutual respect. At that very moment, a young woman in her 20s walked through the glass door of the showroom. She wore simple but clean clothes, and her wide eyes betrayed that she was not used to the discreet luxury of the environment. She clutched a portfolio folder to her chest so tightly that her knuckles were white, a distant echo of Maya on the first day, but with one fundamental difference. The receptionist, a young man named Daniel, trained under the company's new philosophy, stood up with a genuine and welcoming smile. "Good afternoon, welcome to Premium Motors. How can I help you?" The kindness in his voice seemed to calm the young woman instantly. "Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sophia. I have an interview scheduled with Engineer Silva for the Foundation's scholarship." Daniel's smile widened. "Sophia, of course we were expecting you. Engineer Maya is just finishing a calibration in the workshop, but she's on her way. Please, have a seat. Would you like some water? A coffee? Make yourself comfortable." The environment, which had once been an arena of humiliation for Maya, now presented itself to this new candidate as a safe harbor. The entrance to Premium Motors was no longer a barrier of judgment, but a welcoming portal to the future. A few minutes later, the glass door separating the workshop from the showroom opened and Maya appeared. She wore the dark blue jumpsuit that had become her trademark, with the title Technical Director proudly embroidered on her chest. There was a slight smudge of grease on her cheek, a detail she hadn't even noticed, and she was drying her hands on a clean rag while her brain still processed the telemetry of the engine she had just calibrated. Her appearance, which had once been a cause for ridicule in that very place, was now the ultimate symbol of her authenticity and competence. "Engineer Maya," said Daniel, the receptionist, with deference, "Sophia has arrived for the interview." Maya's face, previously focused and analytical, instantly softened into a warm, genuine smile. She put the rag in her pocket and walked directly to the young woman, ignoring any protocol of status. "Sophia, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I'm Maya." She extended her hand, a strong hand, with discreet calluses that told the story of her work. "I read your essay 3. Oh, times. The way you described the process of rebuilding that old motorcycle's engine using makeshift tools, it was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. You have a natural talent." Sophia, who had been expecting a formal interrogation, was speechless, her face blushing with happiness at this specific and sincere recognition from her greatest idol. Maya did not lead her to a cold, impersonal office. Instead, she pointed to a set of comfortable leather armchairs in the corner of the showroom, a space designed for clients to relax. "Let's talk right here. It's more comfortable. Daniel, please bring us 2 coffees." The simple gesture immediately broke the barrier between interviewer and interviewee, creating an environment of equality and respect. When they sat down, Maya leaned forward, her gaze intense and full of genuine curiosity. Her first question was not about grades or career ambitions. It was something much more fundamental. "Sophia, tell me the truth, leaving the technicalities aside for a moment. What was the feeling, the smell, the sound, the feeling in your chest at that exact instant when the engine you spent weeks fixing finally started for the first time?" Sophia blinked, surprised. No one had ever asked her a question like that. And then a huge smile lit up her face. The shyness disappeared, replaced by pure passion. "It was magical," she began, her voice now firm and excited. "The smell of gasoline mixed with hot oil, the first pop of the ignition, and then the sound becoming smooth, the vibration in the handlebars. I felt like I'd brought something to life, that I had understood its secret." As Sophia spoke, Maya saw a reflection of herself. She saw the same spark, the same visceral love for machines, and Maya's heart filled with an overwhelming emotion. She wasn't just conducting an interview, she was connecting with a soulmate, a younger version of herself, to whom she now had the power and the privilege to give the clear path she never had. The conversation lasted almost an hour, flowing effortlessly. Maya and Sophia talked about the beauty of a V12 engine, the frustration of a stripped bolt, and the pure joy of a correct diagnosis. At the end, Maya leaned back in her armchair with a look that was not of an evaluator, but of someone who had found a rare and valuable piece. "Sophia," she said with a gentle seriousness, "the interview was over with your essay. This conversation was just the confirmation. The Foundation scholarship is yours if you want it, but I need you to understand, this is not a gift, it's an investment. We are investing in your talent, in your passion, and in your work ethic, and we expect an extraordinary return." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, nodding with a fierce determination. Maya then stood up with a smile. "But that's enough talk about work. Let's see the work." She gestured towards the workshop door. "This is the second part of the interview. I want to show you where the real magic happens." As they entered the vibrant, noisy space, Sophia's reaction was exactly what Maya had expected. Her eyes showed no fear or intimidation, but a sparkle of pure admiration and belonging. She felt at home. As they walked through the workshop, passing workstations where other women and men collaborated on complex engines, Maya stopped beside the iconic red Ferrari, which was on a lift for a routine checkup. She pointed to the impeccably clean floor. "We have a rule here, Sophia. The workshop floor must be clean enough to eat off of. Organization and cleanliness are a reflection of the precision of our minds." She paused and looked at her own hands, with their calluses and fine lines stained with oil. "But the grease on the hands," she continued, "the grease on the hands is a badge of honor." At that moment, Maya saw her reflection in the car's polished fender and noticed the grease smudge that was still on her cheek, a reminder of her own journey, With a gesture that was both solemn and mischievous, she touched her finger to the smudge on her own face, transferring a small amount of grease to her fingertip. Then, with the care of someone performing an anointing, she approached Sophia and gently drew a small, almost unnoticeable mark on the young woman's cheek. Sophia blinked, surprised, and then a smile of understanding lit up her face. "Never let anyone tell you this is dirt," Maya said, her voice full of warmth and conviction. "This is the mark of our value. It is the sign that we create, we build, we fix. It is what makes us indispensable." The years that followed transformed Premium Motors into something that not even Augusto, in his most ambitious dreams, could have imagined. It ceased to be a mere dealership and became an ecosystem of excellence. The technical center, under Maya's continued leadership, became the most renowned in South America, with a long waiting list of clients willing to pay whatever it took for the guarantee of a perfect job. The foundation, in turn, flourished, having already graduated dozens of women who now held prominent positions throughout the industry, creating an informal network of Maya standard professionals, synonymous with competence and integrity. Augusto Mendez, the former titan of arrogance, found his complete redemption. He became a respected philanthropist, dedicating his time and fortune to expanding the foundation. In every lecture he gave at business ethics forums, he began with the same story. "I want to tell you about the day an angel covered in grease walked into my shop and saved my soul." As for Raimundo and his scheme, justice was relentless. The investigation, initiated by Maya's discovery, dismantled the entire criminal network. Raimundo was captured trying to board a cargo ship and was serving a long sentence for fraud, his greed having led him to a prison cell instead of the wealth he coveted. On a quiet evening, long after the students and employees had gone home, the workshop was silent, bathed only by the security lights. The smell of clean metal and quality oil hung in the air. Maya was not in her glass office analyzing spreadsheets. She was there, on the workshop floor, standing in front of the red Ferrari. The car was no longer used. It was kept as a museum piece, a gleaming monument to the day that changed everything. Augusto approached in silence and stood beside her, both looking at the car in a communion of thoughts that needed no words. He was the one who broke the silence. To think that all of this, he gestured to the immense and prosperous workshop around them, was born from so much anger and humiliation. Maya did not respond verbally. She simply reached out her hand and rested it on the car's cold fender, a gesture of affection and recognition. A serene and satisfied smile adorned her face. Her answer was everywhere. It was in the quietness of that purposeful place, in the bright futures she was helping to build, and in the deep peace that finally inhabited her heart. The woman who was once judged and nearly destroyed by her dirty hands was now revered for having used those very hands to fix not just an engine, but a small, broken piece of the world. Maya's legacy was not just within the walls of Premium Motors, but in the cascade of changes she generated. Sophia, the young woman from the interview a year later, was already one of the most promising students, confidently leading the diagnosis of a classic Jaguar and patiently explaining the secrets of an SU carburetor to a new scholarship student. The mentoring cycle perpetuated itself, a chain of knowledge and respect that grew stronger with each new link. Outside the dealership walls, the competition was forced to react. To avoid losing their best clients to Maya's gold standard, other luxury workshops began, reluctantly, to invest more in training, to value precise diagnosis, and even to, hesitantly, open their doors to more female talent. The tide was turning, not because of an industry-wide moral epiphany, but by the irrefutable force of superior quality competition. One woman's revolution, started in an act of self-defense, was slowly raising the standard of an entire sector. That same night after Augusto had left, Maya remained alone in the silent vastness of the workshop. This was her sanctuary, her empire built not on money or power, but on the solid rock of competence. She walked to her personal toolbox, a large, heavy, red metal cabinet that had been with her since the humble days in her garage. It had scratches and battle scars, each a memory of a challenge overcome. From a drawer, she took out a perfectly clean microfiber cloth. She walked back to the Ferrari, the catalyst of her entire journey, and with the tenderness of a mother caring for a child, she wiped away the single, solitary fingerprint she had left on the fender. As the last trace of her presence on the bodywork disappeared, the narrative of her life was complete. In the end, Maya Silva's story was never about cars. It was about the indelible power of a person who refused to be diminished, about the dignity found in Greece and the strength discovered in injustice, and about the fundamental truth that excellence has no gender, integrity has no price, and the true engine that moves the world runs not on fuel, but on the unwavering courage of the human spirit.